There is a moment in the book of Genesis that has haunted theologians, artists, and ordinary readers for thousands of years. A man is alone in the middle of the night beside a river called Jabbok. He has sent his wives, his children, his servants, and all his possessions across the water. He is completely alone in the dark, and then, without warning, without explanation, a man appears, and they begin to wrestle. They wrestle through the night, all night long, and the mysterious figure cannot overpower Jacob, so he reaches out and touches the socket of Jacob's hip, and something pops, something tears, and Jacob is left limping and gasping, and still he holds on. The figure says, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." And Jacob, this broken, limping, exhausted man, looks up and says something that might be the most audacious thing ever uttered in the darkness. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And then the figure asks him a question. Not a geographical question, not a logistical question. The most devastating question God could possibly ask this particular man at this particular moment in his life. The question was simply this: "What is your name?" We are going to spend the next 30 minutes understanding why that question was so devastating. Why it broke something open in Jacob that 20 years of suffering had not been able to break. Why that single night on the banks of the Jabbok River was the moment toward which Jacob's entire life had been moving. And why the story of this one man in this one dark night might be the story of your life too. Because here is the truth that I want you to hold on to before we even begin. God did not appear at the Jabbok River to destroy Jacob. He appeared there to rename him. And there is a world of difference between those two things. Let us go back to the beginning. Before Jacob was born, before he had drawn a single breath or made a single choice, God spoke a word over him. His mother Rebekah was pregnant with twins, and the pregnancy was turbulent. The two children wrestling inside her womb, colliding with each other, pushing against each other, and she cried out to God and asked what was happening. And God said to her, "2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." Stop there for a moment, because that word, that prophecy spoken before these children were even born, was both a grace and a burden. It was a grace because it told Rebekah something true about the divine purpose, and it was a burden because it set into motion a family drama that would take decades to resolve, cost enormous amounts of pain, and leave every person involved permanently changed. The older will serve the younger. That was the divine order. But no one in the family seemed to know what to do with it. And what happens when God's purpose is known but God's timing is not trusted is the central tragedy of Jacob's early life. When the boys were born, Esau came first, red, hairy, big. And then Jacob came out with his hand wrapped around his brother's heel. They named him Jacob. In Hebrew, the name Yaakov comes from the word for heel akef. But it also carries the connotation of the word for supplanter, for one who grabs, for one who comes from behind and takes what belongs to another. Before Jacob could speak, before he could walk, before he could make a single moral choice, he was handed a name that was essentially a prophecy of cunning. I want you to think about that carefully, because it matters enormously for everything that follows. Jacob grew up in a home where his mother knew the divine promise, and his father did not honor it. His father Isaac loved Esau, loved the wild game Esau brought home, loved the rugged outdoor masculinity of his firstborn. His mother Rebekah loved Jacob, the quiet one, the one who stayed home, the one she had received the prophecy about. The family was divided right down the middle, and Jacob, the quiet one, the home dweller, grew up watching his father's eyes light up for his brother, grew up understanding that in his father's house he was not the chosen one regardless of what God had said. That is a wound that goes very deep. It is the wound of being invisible in your own family. It is the wound of knowing that you are supposed to be something, but having no one around you who sees it or affirms it. And out of that wound, Jacob begins to grasp. He begins to scheme. He begins to do what people do when they are afraid that what God promised will not arrive. They try to help it along themselves. The birthright episode is the first evidence of this. Esau comes home from the field, exhausted and dramatic, claiming he is about to die of hunger. Jacob has been cooking lentil stew. And Jacob, quiet, calculating, ever watchful, sees an opportunity. "Sell me your birthright first." Esau, with the terrifying casualness of a man who does not value what he has, agrees. He sells his birthright for a bowl of stew and walks away without a backward glance. And the biblical text says something devastating at the end of that scene. Esau despised his birthright. Now I want to be careful here, because it is easy to make Jacob the hero of that scene, the clever one who understood the value of the spiritual inheritance while his foolish brother threw it away. But the Bible is more honest than that. Jacob obtained something real through means that were less than honorable. He exploited his brother's weakness. He leveraged his brother's hunger. And even if Esau was careless and impulsive, Jacob was calculating and opportunistic. Neither brother was walking in the fullness of character that the promise required, and then comes the blessing. This is the scene that changes everything. Isaac is old, his eyes are nearly gone, he knows he is dying, and he wants to pronounce the patriarchal blessing over Esau before he goes. The blessing in the ancient world was not merely words. It was a legally and spiritually binding declaration of identity, inheritance, and destiny. Isaac calls Esau and tells him to go hunt game and prepare a meal, after which he will bless him. Rebekah overhears the conversation, and Rebekah, who has carried the prophecy in her heart for decades, the older will serve the younger, decides that she cannot wait any longer. She cannot watch the blessing go to the wrong son. She calls Jacob and sets the plan in motion. Kill 2 goats, prepare the stew, dress in Esau's clothing, put the goatskins on your hands and neck to mimic Esau's hairiness, go to your father, and receive the blessing. And Jacob does it. But notice something that we often pass over too quickly. Notice that Jacob hesitates. He says to his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." He is not hesitating because of moral conviction. He is hesitating because he is afraid of getting caught, and Rebekah says, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say." There is something profoundly sad about that exchange. A mother telling her son to go and lie to his dying father. A son willing to do it, not because he believes it is right, but because his mother has taken the risk onto herself. Both of them believing, perhaps, that they are simply doing what needs to be done to help God's prophecy come true. Neither of them apparently considering that if God made the prophecy, perhaps God was capable of fulfilling it without their deception. Jacob walks into his father's tent wearing his brother's skin. Think about that image. The man who will one day become the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. The man whose name will be given to an entire nation. He stands before his elderly, blind father, and he lies. He wears his brother's identity. He smells like his brother. He claims to be his brother. He even invokes the name of God. "The Lord your God gave me success." And Isaac, whose ears tell him something is wrong, but whose hands and nose tell him otherwise, gives the blessing. He blesses Jacob with heaven's dew and earth's richness, with dominion over peoples and nations, with the promise that those who curse him will be cursed, and those who bless him will be blessed. And Jacob walks out of the tent with everything he came for, and everything is about to collapse around him. Esau returns from the field minutes later. He prepares the food. He walks into his father's tent and Isaac trembles. The text says he trembled violently, because in that shaking, terrified moment, Isaac understands what has happened, and he says the words that cannot be taken back. "I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." The blessing once spoken has landed. It cannot be recalled. Esau's cry in that moment is one of the most heartbreaking sounds in all of Scripture. He bursts out with a loud and bitter cry and begs his father for any blessing that remains. And Esau, most despised birthright right now, feels fully the weight of what he has lost. He wept aloud, the text says. He wept. And then Esau makes a decision. When the days of mourning for his father are over, he will kill Jacob. Jacob runs, he runs into the night, into the wilderness, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a blessing obtained by deception. He runs toward Haran, toward his mother's brother Laban, toward a land he has never seen, and he runs carrying the weight of a name that has proven itself entirely accurate. Jacob the grasper. Jacob the supplanter. Jacob the one who takes what is not his. He is alone for the first time in his life, and the wilderness does not care about his cleverness. The first night comes. Jacob is somewhere between Beersheba and Haran, and the sun sets, and there is nothing around him but rocks and open sky. He takes one of the stones, puts it under his head, and lies down to sleep. It is one of the loneliest images in the Bible, a man using a rock for a pillow, utterly alone, having left everything and everyone behind. Whatever Jacob was expecting from that night, it was not what happened. He dreamed, and in his dream, there was a stairway. Some translations say a ladder, resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And above it all stood the Lord, and God spoke, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." That is an astonishing statement. Read it again slowly. God does not begin by addressing Jacob's deception. God does not begin by demanding repentance or acknowledgement of guilt. God speaks the covenant, the same covenant he spoke to Abraham, the same covenant he spoke to Isaac, and he speaks it directly to Jacob, to this fleeing, lying, scheming man who has just defrauded his blind father and stolen his brother's blessing. God meets Jacob in the wilderness, not after he has cleaned himself up, not after he has made things right, not after he has earned some measure of worthiness. God meets him in the wilderness with a rock for a pillow, on what might be the worst night of his life. When Jacob woke up, the text says he was afraid. But it was a different kind of afraid than the fear that had driven him out of his father's house. This was the fear that comes from realizing that you are standing on holy ground. He said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." He called the place Bethel, house of God, and he set up the stone he had slept on as a pillar and poured oil on it. And then Jacob made a vow. "If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God." And here is where we must be honest. That vow is not entirely beautiful. Jacob is essentially saying, "If you prove yourself to me, then you will be my God." It is the language of a man who has spent his whole life negotiating, trading birthright for stew, trading deception for blessing. Jacob is now trying to negotiate with God. He is still operating from his old name, his old identity, his old instinct to grasp and manage and control. But God does not rebuke him for it. God accepts the stumbling, conditional faith of this frightened young man, because God sees not just who Jacob is. God sees Israel in the face of Jacob, even when Jacob himself cannot. Jacob rises and continues to Haran. 20 years pass. They are not easy years. In Haran, Jacob meets his match. His uncle Laban is everything Jacob is, shrewd, calculating, willing to deceive when deception serves his purposes, and in Laban God gives Jacob something extraordinary, a mirror. Jacob falls in love with Rachel. He agrees to work 7 years for her hand in marriage. 7 years, and the text says they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. There is something genuinely beautiful in that. Underneath the scheming and the cunning, Jacob was capable of enormous, faithful, patient love. He worked 7 years and did not complain, and then came the wedding night. Laban brought the veiled bride into the darkness of the wedding tent, and in the morning Jacob looked at the face beside him, and it was Leah, not Rachel. Leah, the older daughter. Laban had switched the younger for the older, had used the darkness and the wedding veil to deceive his nephew into marrying the wrong woman. I want you to sit with the irony of that moment. Jacob, who used a disguise to deceive his blind father. Jacob, who put on his brother's skin to steal his brother's blessing. Jacob, who exploited the darkness of his father's failing eyes. Now, in the darkness of his own wedding night, he has been deceived by a disguise, by a veil, by someone exploiting the darkness of the night. He asks Laban with barely controlled outrage, "What is this you have done to me?" And somewhere in those words, if Jacob had been listening carefully, he might have heard the ghost of another voice. The voice of Esau, 20 years earlier, asking the same question of a father who said, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." God does not always explain what he is doing, but sometimes he lets us live the consequences of our own choices in such vivid, unmistakable ways that the lesson becomes inescapable. Jacob spent years experiencing what it feels like to be on the receiving end of deception, to work faithfully and be cheated, to trust someone and be betrayed, to love deeply and find that love manipulated. He works another 7 years for Rachel. He marries both sisters. He has children, 12 sons and a daughter, born into a household that is tangled with rivalry and pain, with 2 sisters competing for one man's heart, with servants pressed into bearing children as proxies in a fertility war. It is messy and complicated and nothing like what Jacob might have dreamed his family would look like. But God is building something. In the chaos of that family, in the pain and the rivalry and the confusion, God is slowly, quietly, painstakingly constructing the 12 tribes of Israel, Reuben and Simeon and Levi and Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad and Asher, Issachar and Zebulun, Joseph and eventually Benjamin, 12 sons, and not one of them born into a simple, peaceful family. Every single one of them arrived in the middle of struggle and longing and imperfection, because that is how God works. He does not wait for perfect conditions. He builds nations out of broken families. After 20 years, God says to Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." And Jacob gathers his wives, his children, his flocks, all the wealth he has accumulated, and he leaves secretly while Laban is away shearing sheep. He is running again. But this time he is running toward something rather than away from it. He is heading home. He is heading toward the brother he defrauded 20 years ago. He is heading toward the confrontation he has been dreading for 2 decades. And as he travels, word comes back from the messengers he has sent ahead. Esau is coming, with 400 men. 400 men. Jacob does not know if Esau is to embrace him or to destroy him, and in his terror for the first time in his life, Jacob prays a genuinely humble prayer. Not a negotiation, not a vow with conditions, he prays. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become 2 camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. He calls himself unworthy. He acknowledges that everything he has came from God. Something is shifting inside this man. Something is cracking open. The old Jacob, the one who would have immediately started calculating and scheming, is still there, still preparing an elaborate gift of flocks and herds to send ahead to appease his brother. But beneath the strategy, there is now a prayer. There is now a genuine cry for help. There is now, perhaps for the first time, the beginning of surrender. He sends everyone across the Jabbok River, and he is alone in the dark. The 3rd night comes, and this is the night that changes everything. We do not know exactly what Jacob was thinking as he stood alone on the bank of that river. Perhaps he was reviewing his strategy for meeting Esau the next day. Perhaps he was praying again. Perhaps he was simply too afraid to sleep. But what happened next was not part of any strategy Jacob had devised. A man appeared, and they began to wrestle. Now the text is mysterious here, deliberately so. It does not immediately tell us who this man is. It simply says, a man, and they wrestle through the night, all night long, neither one gaining the decisive advantage. And we have to pause here and ask, what is happening? What does it mean that Jacob wrestles with God? I think it means this. Jacob had spent his entire life wrestling. He had wrestled from the womb, his hand grabbing his brother's heel. He had wrestled with his circumstances, trying to manipulate and manage and control everything around him. He had wrestled with Laban for 20 years. He had wrestled with his own fear. Wrestling was what Jacob knew how to do. It was his fundamental posture toward life. When faced with a challenge, Jacob grabbed it and refused to let go. And so God came to Jacob on his own terms. God did not appear to Jacob in a burning bush as he appeared to Moses. God did not speak to Jacob in a still small voice as he spoke to Elijah under the juniper tree after the prophet had collapsed in exhaustion and despair. God did not call to Jacob from a great wind or a fire or an earthquake. God came to Jacob in a wrestling match, because that was the language Jacob understood. And that tells us something beautiful and important about the way God meets each person. He meets us where we are. He speaks the language of our own experience. He enters the wrestling ring if that is where we are living. They wrestle through the night. And the mysterious man, who we gradually come to understand is not merely a man, cannot overpower Jacob. This is not because Jacob is stronger than God. This is because God is choosing to hold himself back, to genuinely engage with Jacob rather than simply overwhelm him. God is taking Jacob seriously. God is honoring Jacob's determination even as he prepares to shatter it. And then toward daybreak, the figure touches the socket of Jacob's hip. Just touches it. And the hip is wrenched out of place. With a single touch, in a single moment, the being who Jacob has been holding to a standstill all night demonstrates that he could have ended this at any moment. The physical superiority was never the point. The point was that Jacob needed to feel both things simultaneously, that he had been genuinely met, genuinely engaged, genuinely wrestled with, and also that the one he was wrestling with was infinitely beyond him. Jacob is now injured, limping, aching. Dawn is beginning to lighten the edges of the sky, and the figure says, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." And Jacob, broken, limping, exhausted Jacob, tightens his grip and says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." That sentence is the turning point of Jacob's entire life. Because notice what Jacob is doing here. He is not letting go and demanding answers. He is not letting go and negotiating. He is not even letting go and praying. He is simply, stubbornly, desperately refusing to release the one thing he knows matters. He has run from his father. He has run from Esau. He has run from Laban. He has run from his own name. But here, in the dark, injured and overwhelmed and facing something he cannot fully comprehend, Jacob stops running and holds on, and then comes the question, "What is your name?" Think about this carefully. The being Jacob is wrestling with has just demonstrated the ability to dislocate his hip with a touch. Does this being not know Jacob's name? Of course he knows Jacob's name. God spoke Jacob's name before he was born. God spoke it at Bethel 20 years ago. The question is not for God's benefit. The question is for Jacob's. What is your name? Is an invitation. No, it is a demand for Jacob to acknowledge who he truly is. And Jacob answers. He says his own name. He says Jacob. He says the name that means grasper, supplanter, deceiver. He says the name that has defined him, constrained him, shadowed him his entire life. He looks into the face of God in the dark and says, I am the one who grabbed. I am the one who deceived. I am the one who has been running. That is an act of confession that no formal religious ritual could have produced. And then the figure says, your name will no longer be Jacob but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Israel, the one who wrestles with God, the one who persists, who holds on, who refuses to let go of the divine even when the divine is wounding him. The name change is not a reward for cleverness. It is a recognition of something true that has emerged in the wrestling. Jacob, the grasper, the one who tried to take blessings by force, has become Israel, the one who received a blessing precisely by not letting go, and Jacob limps from that encounter with a new name, a blessing he did not manufacture, and a wound that will never fully heal. He names the place Peniel, because he says, I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. He walks into the morning sun limping, and there, in the distance, is Esau, coming with 400 men. Jacob bows 7 times as he approaches his brother. Each bow is an act of genuine humility that the old Jacob, the grasper, the manipulator, would have found impossible. But the man who is walking toward Esau now is not entirely the same man who ran away 20 years ago. He is limping. He is marked. He has been broken open by something that happened in the dark, and he is different. Esau, who 20 years ago declared his intention to kill his brother, Esau, who had every human right to be furious and unforgiving, Esau runs to meet him. He throws his arms around Jacob's neck. He kisses him, and they both weep. I want you to notice what made that reconciliation possible. It was not Jacob's elaborate gift of livestock sent ahead. It was not Jacob's diplomatic bowing 7 times. Those were Jacob's old strategies. The strategies of a man who trusts his own cleverness to solve every problem. What actually made the reconciliation possible was something that happened the night before, at the Jabbok River, when Jacob was broken and renamed and sent limping into the dawn. God had been working on Esau, too, in the years of separation. God had been softening what could have been hardened into stone. And when a truly changed Jacob, limping, humble, renamed, walked toward him, Esau could see it. He could see that something had happened, and his own heart responded. The wrestling match at Jabbok did not just transform Jacob. It made possible the healing of a broken family. Now I want to ask you something personal, and I want you to sit with it honestly rather than answering it too quickly. What is your name? Not the name your parents gave you. I mean, what is the name you have been living under? What is the identity that was handed to you before you were old enough to choose it? What is the story you have been telling yourself about who you are and what you deserve and how the world works? Maybe your name is not enough. Maybe it was given to you by a parent who favored your sibling, just as Isaac favored Esau, and you have been grasping ever since, reaching for achievement, for approval, for success, trying to prove that you belong at the table. Maybe your name is unworthy. Maybe someone in your past looked at you the way Isaac looked past Jacob and saw someone else, someone more impressive, more capable, more deserving of love, and that look has followed you into every room you have ever entered since. Maybe your name is the one who failed. Maybe you have done something, maybe you have done many things, that you are not proud of, and that failure has become so fused to your identity that you cannot imagine God looking at you without seeing it first. Jacob carried his name for decades. He carried it through the deception of his father, through 20 years in a foreign land, through marriages and children and wealth and loss. He could not escape it, because you cannot outrun a name that lives inside you. You can run from your brother. You can run from your father's house. You can cross rivers and borders and decades. But the name you carry in your own heart goes with you every single step of the way. And that is why God had to come to Jacob in the dark, alone, at the Jabbok River. Because there was nowhere left to run. Everyone had been sent across the water. There were no more strategies to plan, no more gifts to send ahead, no more deals to arrange. There was only Jacob and the dark and whatever was coming toward him in the morning. And in that stripping away of everything, in that absolute aloneness, God showed up, not to condemn Jacob, not to punish him, not to finally settle the score for all the years of scheming and grasping. God showed up to ask him his name, and to give him a new one. I think about Elijah, exhausted under the juniper tree, telling God he had had enough, that he wanted to die. And God's response was not a rebuke. It was bread and water and the words, "The journey is too great for you." God met Elijah in his exhaustion, fed him, and sent him on. I think about Moses at the burning bush, a murderer, a fugitive, a man who had been hiding in the wilderness for 40 years. And God did not open the conversation by cataloging Moses' failures. God opened the conversation by telling Moses his own name and commissioning him for the greatest work of his life. I think about Peter, standing by a charcoal fire after the resurrection, the same kind of fire beside which he had denied Jesus 3 times, and Jesus asking him, not once but 3 times, "Do you love me?" Not to humiliate him, not to force a confession, but to give him the chance to say yes 3 times in the place where he had said no 3 times, to overwrite the denial with restoration, to give Peter a new story to live inside. God has a pattern. He meets the running ones. He meets the exhausted ones. He meets the ones who have made a wreck of things and are sleeping on stone pillows in the dark. And he does not lead with judgment. He leads with presence. He says, "I am here. I have been here all along. I was at Bethel when you thought you were alone. I was in Haran when Laban was cheating you. I was at Jabbok when you thought the dark was empty. I have been with you in every place you tried to leave me behind." And then he asks the question. His version of "What is your name?" His version of "Do you love me?" His version of Moses spoken into the burning wilderness. The specific question changes depending on the person, but the purpose is always the same. He wants you to stop. He wants you to face what you have been carrying. He wants you to say the true thing out loud in the dark to him, not because he needs the information, because you need the release of speaking it. Because confession, real, bare, unadorned confession, is the moment the grasping stops and the receiving begins. My name is Jacob. I am the one who grabbed. I am the one who deceived. I am the one who has been running. And the answer that comes back across the dark river of our honesty is not condemnation. The answer is a new name. Your name will no longer be Jacob. Your name will be Israel. Your name will no longer be not enough. Your name will be beloved. Your name will no longer be unworthy. Your name will be chosen. Your name will no longer be the one who failed. Your name will be the one who wrestled with God and did not let go. But here is the part we most need to hear, the limp. Jacob did not walk away from Peniel the same way he arrived. He walked away with a permanent, physical, visible reminder of what happened in the dark. Every step Jacob took for the rest of his life told the story of the night he wrestled with God. Every time he walked into a room, every time he stood before his sons, every time he climbed a hill or crossed a field, his body said, "Something happened to me. Something broke and was remade. I am not the same man I was before the river." We live in a culture that wants transformation to be clean and complete and invisible. We want to have our Jabbok moment and then walk away healed and whole and unmarked, as if the wrestling never happened. But the limp is not a sign that the blessing was incomplete. The limp is part of the blessing. The limp is the testimony. The wound that will not fully close is the very thing that keeps Jacob humble, that keeps him from sliding back into the old patterns of self-sufficiency and manipulation. Every morning when Jacob woke up and felt the ache in his hip, it whispered to him, "You did not win that night. You were met. You were held. You were broken and blessed by something infinitely greater than yourself. Do not forget it. Your wounds, your limp, the places where life has broken you and left you walking differently than you used to walk. These are not disqualifications. They are not evidence that God failed you or that your faith was insufficient. They may be the very marks of the most real encounter with God you have ever had. The places where you are weakest are often the places where God has pressed closest. And the limp you carry is not something to hide. It is something to witness with. Jacob went on to meet Esau. He went on to settle in Canaan. He went on to experience the devastating loss of his beloved Rachel in childbirth, and the years of grief when he believed his son Joseph was dead, and the extraordinary late-life revelation that Joseph was alive and had become the second most powerful man in Egypt. Jacob's story did not become smooth and painless after Peniel. The limp did not protect him from future loss. He still mourned. He still made mistakes. He still showed the kind of favoritism toward Joseph that had wounded his own childhood, and that favoritism would fracture his family in new and terrible ways. Jacob was not perfected at Jabbok. He was transformed. Those are not the same thing. Perfection removes the capacity for failure. Transformation changes the fundamental orientation of the heart. It shifts the center of gravity from self to God, from grasping to receiving, from running to resting. Jacob after Jabbok was still recognizably Jacob. He still worried. He still planned. He still loved some of his children more than others, but there was something different in him now. There was a capacity for humility that had not been there before. There was a willingness to acknowledge dependence on God that the old Jacob had expressed only conditionally, only with the word if, and the fruit of that transformation was enormous, even if it was slow. Because Jacob's 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. Because one of those sons, Judah, the fourth son of Leah, the wife Jacob had not chosen, would carry a line of descendants that would eventually produce a king named David and, through David, a child born in Bethlehem who would be called the Son of God. The very name Israel, the name given in the dark at Jabbok, the name forged in wrestling and wounding and blessing, became the name of an entire people, an entire covenant community, an entire story of God's relentless, pursuing, transforming love. All of that enormous, world-altering, history-shaping story. It passed through one night on the bank of a river where a broken man refused to let go. So here is where I want to leave you. If you are someone who has been running, and if you are honest with yourself, you know whether you have been running. I want to tell you something about the God of Jacob. He is not waiting at the end of your running to punish you for how long it took. He is not keeping a ledger of the years you spent grasping instead of receiving, the years you spent wearing someone else's identity instead of accepting your own. He is not disappointed in you for the wilderness years, for the Haran years, for the years you spent working for Laban and being cheated and wondering what happened to the promise. He was there. He was always there. He was at Bethel before you knew he was there. He was in Haran in the middle of the labor and the deception and the family chaos. He was watching the slow construction of something in you that you could not yet see. And he is at the Jabbok River of your life, at that place where your strategies have run out, where you have sent everyone else across the water, where you are alone in the dark with nothing left to manage. And he is not approaching you to condemn you. He is approaching you to wrestle with you, to genuinely engage with you, to take you seriously enough to meet you in the language of your own struggle. And when you have wrestled long enough, when the dawn is beginning to come, when you are tired and aching and you can feel the limits of your own strength, he is going to ask you the question, his version of it, the question that cuts through every defense and every strategy and every carefully constructed identity. And when you answer honestly, when you speak your true name in the dark, the response will not be rejection. The response will be a new name. It will be the name he has been keeping for you, the name he saw in you before you were born, the name that was always meant to be yours but that you could not receive until you stopped running long enough to be still. You may walk away limping. Almost certainly you will. The deepest encounters with God tend to leave marks, but you will walk away blessed, named, known, and oriented for the first time or the 1,000th time toward home. Jacob's story does not end at Jabbok. It continues through pain and loss and reunion and grace and a death in Egypt, with his sons gathered around him, with his hands stretched out over grandchildren he is blessing, with his voice still speaking the purposes of God over the generations that will come after him. 147 years of a life that was marked from beginning to end by the pursuit of a God who would not let him go, who would not let him stay Jacob when he had always meant to make him Israel. That God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is pursuing you with the same relentless, patient, tender ferocity with which he pursued a grasping young man across the wilderness and into the dark. He is not put off by your name, the one that feels too true and too heavy and too old to put down. He is not surprised by your history, not overwhelmed by your years of running, not exhausted by how long it has taken you to get to the river. He is simply there, in the dark, waiting. And he will wrestle with you as long as it takes. And when the dawn comes, and the dawn always comes, he will ask you your name. Answer honestly. What happens next will change everything.